I've been so excited to talk to everybody here at CMX. I've been catching some of the sessions earlier today, and of course, some of the things affecting our community of community professionals has been downturns and job changes, and all of the things with the pandemic and the resultant activities that have happened. So this topic is something that I think is going to be valuable and interesting for a number of you, but we'll be looking for your feedback on it. If we could go ahead and share the deck, appreciate it. Just to get started with this, I feel like you need to know a little bit about how I came to be talking about talent communities. Clock Tower Advisors is really much more about overall community strategy for external communities of various sorts. I even work in some internal communities as well. But the world of talent and hiring and recruitment is something that is important to me because it was one of my earlier careers. Community professional is not my first career out of the gate. In fact, this is probably my fourth. If you think about, I was originally a journalist and then was studying to be an English professor, and then became a recruiter and actually worked as a recruiter, as a third-party recruiter and for corporations for about 14 years before I found my way into the wonderful family of community professionals that I've come to know today. But I think there are a lot of correspondences between recruiting and community. And just to give you a brief overview of why I got into recruiting and what it was that really eventually drove me in the direction of community, I'll begin. So one of the things that I loved best about being a recruiter was that I always said to people that it was the best combination or the most pro-social combination of being a bartender, a bounty hunter, and a psychoanalyst that you could find out there without having the bad parts of any of those jobs. I really enjoyed the opportunity to get to know people, to meet them face to face or virtually, to help them understand what their goals are, where they wanted to be, and how they could apply their strengths in the direction of a new company or a new career. And I like to think that I was pretty good at playing the long game as a recruiter. Recruiting can tend to be a very transactional kind of job. And I really, in my heart, enjoyed the opportunity to get to know people and to help them over a course of years. There were some people that I ended up placing once or twice in the course of my career, just because they came back to me when they were looking for a job again the next time. Most of them stayed, though. I'm happy to say, and really the work that I did was almost exclusively in the technology space. The challenges of the job, however, were some things that caused me to end up moving more in the direction of community, and I'll tell you why. Some of these things were having to juggle too many open requisitions at a given time, getting a list of irrational job requirements that were not realistic, that didn't dwell on the real world, unreasonable amounts of time to hire, too many hoops to jump through, broken interview processes, poor storytelling and conflicting messages. What I mean by that is the inability to tell a good story about your organization, about why someone should work there. Or as a recruiter, I was able to tell a good story about the organization, but then the candidates received conflicting messages when they went inside the company to talk to the hiring professionals there. Candidates then who, for various reasons, reneged on an accepted offer. They accepted the offer, but something else came up. Their priorities changed. They got cold feet. Maybe the requisition changed in some ways too that they didn't like, and you end up losing people that way. And then ultimately, a lack of flexibility. At the time when I was doing recruiting, remote work was not really much of a thing. If somebody was asking for the flexibility of shifting their hours slightly even, or maybe even working after, maybe working a longer 4 days and a shorter 1 day shift, it was something that didn't work. And so ultimately these kinds of stressors, these kinds of things that I think are faced by many recruiters and human resources professionals, drove me from that space a little bit more into the community building space, where we're helping to connect people more directly with their constituents, with stakeholders, with other interested individuals, and really focused on helping to tell the story of that organization in real and authentic sorts of ways. So that's how I ended up here. But recruiting has always sort of been in the back of my head. Once you've been a recruiter, it's something that always sort of stays in the blood. And so it's something that I've kept tabs on. And of course, I have many friends and colleagues from the recruitment space who I continue to stay in touch with over the years. What I've learned from them, fast forwarding to 2022, is a whole new set of stressors, many of which you're going to be familiar with. Things like new generational preferences between Gen X and millennials and Gen Z. There's a lot of differences in the ways that people born in very distant times to the current times are approaching what they like to do or don't like to do in a workplace, what they look for in a workplace. COVID, monkeypox, the rise of pandemics, and all the things that resulted in, like the Great Resignation, quiet quitting, remote work. And remote work, this is a huge one. As I've talked to and road tested the ideas that I'm going to be sharing today with my friend and colleague Ilker, who alluded to this a little bit earlier. This is really the first question out of candidates' mouths now, as there are job openings that come up, and I think this is something that impacts us greatly in the community space. Companies were really forced into this world of remote work, digital transformation. It was something that was kind of there, but I think since 2020, it's something that's become very much there, and not all organizations were prepared to make that transition into the space. And it's caused a lot of churn, especially where organizations want to go back to the way things were, but they recognize now that hybrid and remote work situations are by and large a fact of life. There are a couple of holdout companies that still insist that they want people back into the office full time, but more often than not, and especially for categories of knowledge workers like ourselves, remote work is a reality. Social unrest and the war in Ukraine, and then of course now where we are today, a bit of an economic downturn, inflation, layoffs, and hiring freezes. So again, these all really formulate a picture of a VUCA world. And if you haven't run into VUCA as a term, it comes up from time to time. We are living in a time of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And that time is not likely to change back fast. Where the world we lived in, I often joke about it as the before time, is not a world that's coming back. I think the organizations and the technologies and the way that they operate need to change fundamentally. And I think along with it, the ways that talent is acquired and courted and brought into organizations and brought through the full life cycle needs to change along with it. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened to a great extent. So that brings me to my friend Ilker and some conversations that we've had. Ilker and I have been colleagues for a long while now, and we get together informally on a weekly basis to chat about the community space, about community strategy, and about ways that we can approach the market in novel ways. One of the things that came up was that we felt there's been a lot of really great information and training and resources around community building in general. But there are opportunities to go deeper and to go into niche areas and niche kinds of communities in a more in-depth kind of fashion. And so one of the things Ilker said was that communities deserve a more central and comprehensive role in talent engagement strategies. Now, you put two community people in a room and you pose any particular problem to them, and it's very likely that community is going to be a part of that answer, of course. So take that with a grain of salt. But the ideas that I'm going to be putting forward here in a moment are really related to that idea of talent acquisition and engagement over time, and what we can do about it. So again, having that conversation, we said, yeah, we should maybe do something with this idea. And then, of course, kicking myself because I've come out of the recruiting world and been in there for so long. Why didn't we think of something like that sooner? Why haven't we done more with this sooner? Now, I don't mean to imply that organizations aren't thinking about community in terms of their talent acquisition and engagement strategies. I want to suggest that most organizations haven't thought about it comprehensively. If they have, I'd love to hear about them. I'd love to hear about your experiences and things that you found. So if you have, I invite you to reach out and connect to me about these things going forward. So that brings us to the idea of talent communities, and a working definition that Ilker and I have worked on with this has been that talent communities are an approach to cultivating talent and hiring practices that connects potential, current, and former employees via online communities so that they can do a couple of things: help co-create the culture and processes of an organization, sustain hiring capacity. And again, with recruiting, so much of it is just in time and not being able to forecast trends. By having talent communities, I feel strongly that that's something that can smooth out demands for capacity over time. Increasing the number of viable job candidates for a role. You can get plenty of job candidates for roles, but keeping the viable ones front and center is always a challenge when you're managing a talent pipeline of people. Decreasing time to offers, keeping everyone highly engaged with the brand, and increasing the likelihood of long-term retention. So that's a lot to promise. Let's delve into this a little bit further. How does it work? So if you look at a typical hiring journey, and I've mapped it out here, I apologize if it's a little small. Again, I know the slides are going to be available for this, or anyone who's interested in the graphic, I'm happy to send it over to you. But moving from left to right, most recruitment begins with that sourcing stage. And these are a variety, it's not an exhaustive list of the ways in which candidates typically get found by organization. But I will say it's usually a mix of what I would call hunting for candidates versus attracting candidates. And so we find candidates through job fairs, through posting and praying about job openings, through social media platforms like LinkedIn, through your company website and your employer, hopefully your employer branded website, print or broadcast media, direct headhunting, calling up people and seeing if they're interested in a new work opportunity, or referrals from your existing employees. From here, that process tends to be a pretty regular one, moving from candidate intake, where there's initial screenings, to moving into a more formalized kind of interview process, usually multi-step, meeting with multiple people from teams. The larger the organization, the more odious the process has tended to be, in my experience. And then going through background checks and referencing and getting to an offer, negotiation, and acceptance stage. From here, we go to the start date and onboarding. Provided that candidate has made it through the process and that pipeline to get to that start and onboarding phase, then you can breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief that they've come in, joined your organization, and they're no longer really involved with that external process or those external spaces. From here, ideally, hopefully, maybe if the organization is forward-looking, they've got good professional development, and they've got the ability to solicit referrals for additional job candidates. Who else do you know who would be great to work for our company? We have a referral bonus, or we have some kind of incentive program around that. At some point, hopefully much later, that candidate may decide for various reasons that they need to leave the organization. The employee decides, I need to grow elsewhere, I can't grow here, or the company goes through a downsizing or a right sizing, whatever they choose to call it, to make themselves sleep better at night. And there's a parting of ways. If that process is done well, there is an exit interview to understand what worked or what didn't work around the company, and hopefully something to help that employee who's leaving and going out into the world to feel better about where they've been on the journey, that was valuable, that they're not disgruntled, and that they don't go up on Glassdoor and trash the company with a bad review. Then finally, at some point, maybe in the future, maybe if it's a good recruiter, maybe if it's a hiring manager that remembers the person they worked with, maybe, and if both sides are willing, they may come back to the organization. As you might imagine, there's a lot of failure points in this journey map, and at any point here, there could be someone that decides to leave the organization in those early stages. And when somebody leaves that organization, there's probably more chances than not that they're never going to come back again. So how do communities lay on top of this process to improve it? Well, as Ilker and I have had our conversations, we've come really up with about 3 different types of or categories of talent communities. These include external communities that are either earned or owned, and we'll get into details about these in a slide or two. Excuse me. Internal communities, whatever your employer-based social network or internal, teams group happens to be, and then alumni community for candidates who have left the organization, but they still want to stay connected, or you want to keep them connected in some way or another. Let's overlay that on top of the workflow. So external communities, whether they're owned or earned, affect the early parts of the process, the candidate intake, interviews, background checks, and offer stage. At the time when a candidate becomes internal to the organization, from start and onboarding through their life cycle, and hopefully through the point where they're quitting and have an exit interview, they're internal to the organization. And you want to maintain good relationships and have good opportunities for professional development in that organization. And then finally, on the far end of things, when a candidate leaves, you want to keep them connected in some way, or at least ensure that they can continue to be a fan of the organization, even though their journey is taking them elsewhere. And those are the alumni communities. Let's break these down a little bit further. So if you start thinking about external earned communities, these are places that, maybe there's developer relations, maybe it's a community based on an internal, industry vertical, like a trade association or professional association. Maybe it's a community based on a professional skill set or some software that's used within your company. Or it could even be your TikTok following, or it could be a LinkedIn group. These are external communities, loosely speaking, and there's certainly places where you could identify talent and start to engage with them. In thinking about formalizing the strategy around using external or earned communities, you're going to ask a couple of readiness questions. How are you going to connect with talent you might want to hire in these particular communities? Especially if you don't own the community, approaching a developer in an open community like that needs to be very respectfully done. The messaging and approach around it, your recruiters probably already understand. And as a community professional, you may need to coach them a little bit about the etiquette of approaching individuals in those spaces if they don't. What kinds of value can you bring to those individuals? Back when I was doing active recruiting, I belonged to a couple of developer communities, and I made it really clear. I was very transparent to say, look, I am a recruiter. I'm happy to help you if you ever want to talk about a resume or something like that, but I'm here just because I'm interested in the topic and I want to get smarter. And yeah, if you're interested in moving, I'd love to talk to you. But again, it's all about the messaging and the soft approach. And so how you formulate for your organization, having some rules of the road is important. How often will you offer that value? How frequently will you provide it? And how can you paint the best picture of your organization? If you are in an earned community, and not managing that particular space, thinking about what you're going to do to depict your organization, you're the representative. And then finally, how are you going to connect that external and internal community experience? When someone's moving from an external space, a social media platform, or a space that you don't necessarily own, to your internal, you need to make sure that the branding and the messaging is the same, that there's not going to be a cultural whiplash from moving from one place to another. They need to know that the tone and the approach that you've taken in one place is going to be consistent in the next. External or owned communities might be spaces that are like a partner community or a customer support community, something you already own or run. And you need to see if there's room to have a space for talent development within that particular community. Or maybe it's a standalone talent community if you've got a strong driving purpose, such as diversity, equity, and inclusion, maybe development, something like that. So asking your readiness questions about these kinds of communities include things like thinking about whether your brand is recognizable enough to sustain a standalone talent community. If you're a Joe average Fortune 1000 company, maybe not a household name, it may not be as easy for you to establish a standalone community just built on talent. Maybe it needs to be in your partner community, or it needs to be in your customer support community. If you're Coca-Cola or Pepsi, pick your favorite soft drink, you probably can have a standalone community around talent management. Who you're going to target in your own or alumni communities is also important. What kind of talent are you going after? Do you have a particular audience persona in mind? Maybe it's just your most difficult to fill roles that you focus on for that particular community. Are your current external communities strong enough to introduce a talent community? Again, if you're just starting out with your community, you probably don't want to complicate your world too much. And then how are you going to engage candidates or former employees? In other words, how do you keep them interested in this? It's not just about posting a job and getting them to apply for the role. If you're going to keep them engaged over time, and we know this as community professionals, and this is where we can add value to HR teams or recruiters that are interested in this work, what kinds of discussions can they drive? What kind of resources can we offer them? What kind of events can we run? And then really crucially, who's going to own and run these kinds of communities? Is it just going to come down to you as community professionals? Well, you've got other goals for your organization. It's probably worth a discussion with your chief human resources officer or your chief people officer to talk about who can own those conversations within those specifically those talent networks specifically. And then finally, on the internal or own community side, the ROI of these is very particular. It's about employee upskilling and reskilling. It's about strong referrals, getting more people like the great hires you've already got, and gaining stronger employee retention. There are certainly other use cases. I'm sure you can think of them. But thinking about readiness for getting an internal community connected with your talent strategy. Think about whether your employees have access to a space where you can broadcast jobs. You probably do, if you've even got something as basic as a company intranet. But is there, more importantly, a place where they can ask questions or comment about those opportunities? Can your platform allow some limited access also to partners or alumni or contractors? Engaging them within this more private space may be a great place also to have a dedicated space just for your hiring team to interview individuals. Maybe you set up a private group for those kinds of things. This is something that's commonly done in, I've seen merger and acquisition kinds of communities where they'll put together deal rooms, or sales enablement communities where they'll put together deal rooms. Why don't recruitment teams have their own privatized groups just to bring candidates aboard for organizations? Has your internal community been integrated with the talent strategy? Maybe it's been put in some ways, but helping to look across the board, I think that's something that we as community professionals can help organizations think about in more specific ways. And then, is it easy for employees to share their opportunities externally, and how easy is it for ex-employees to actually come back at some point? If we're thinking about integrating these programs and looking overall, we also need to think about what are the success metrics. And here's just a few ideas that you may want to think about to talk about the ROI of these talent communities specifically. Who are the number of applicants who've applied each month, who identified your community as an opportunity? Probably a pretty regular offering of content within these kinds of communities, although I would emphasize by far it needs to be not the only thing that you offer in them. How many discussions are there about each job or opportunity? How many community referred candidates have made it to an offer stage? How many members have accepted an offer versus candidates who've come from other sources? And then this is something from Lou Adler, who's famous in the talent space. What's your retention rate for hired community members 1 year later? So the measurement is not who you successfully brought aboard, but who have you retained over time? So just to give you some final thoughts about this, and I know I've moved at high speed. The important thing that I hope you take away from this is that the journey doesn't end when somebody's hired, that having a talent community approach can and must continue through that person's journey in the company. And so this has actually led Ilker and I to put together a joint venture we're calling Talent-Led Communities. And we welcome conversations about this. Part of what we'd like to be able to do here is to help design and execute candidate community experiences, which include things like putting together optimized talent pools, knowing members better and keeping them engaged, and curating pathways for career paths and skill journeys, to designing and executing employee community experiences. And again, I'm not going to read all these, but I'll leave them up on the screen. Designing and executing alumni community experiences as well. And I think we're kind of at the end here. Again, this is a new concept for us. We think there's definitely value in thinking about incorporating communities more deeply and integrating them within talent engagement strategies. I would really welcome conversations, and I think this is probably a really good spot to take some questions from everybody out there. I haven't had a chance to look out and see what the chatter has been about them, so I'm really curious.
Fantastic. The chat has been actually quite focused and quite lovely comments. So it looks like we've hit a nerve, but in the best way possible. In the sense that there's a lot of thoughts about to the connections between talent and community. So again, I wrote in the chat, it's me being the host of or the MC of Todd is purely by coincidence. It's not like a joint presentation or something. And of course, there is no way on the planet that I would have been able to package this and then deliver it in the neat way that Todd actually delivered this to you, our thoughts and everything. But of course, it still made me really, really proud. So Todd, thank you from the bottom of my heart, and of course, for I speak for also the people who are actively following this conversation as well, for telling us about talent communities. So Melissa has actually. Melissa actually provided a really, really cool comment, and thank you, Melissa, for that. Also true for alumni communities. This is something that was very important for us. So the question is, working with alumni communities made us question talent communities overall. Any advice for talent development, in brackets, support or retention support within career? What do you say?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the first part of the question was about alumni communities and sort of working that side of the equation. Did I catch that right?
Yes. So it's about alumni communities, basically. The role of alumni communities. So this is what I understood from the question from Melissa, and basically it's reflection onto the talent community approach overall. So any advice on that one and how to manage it properly?
Yeah, no, thanks, Melissa. I appreciate that. And we've got some good time to really delve into these a little further. So, I mean, I think the thing that's exciting to me about alumni communities is I don't think that they've really been formalized or thrashed out as a concept. I talk to a lot of people that work in the outplacement space, and they have regular, kinds of meetings for executives who've been downsized out of organizations, or people who've left organizations. And it's not uncommon, if you've been at least a senior management role or an executive level role, that you get an opportunity to really get some training, maybe get some upskilling or reskilling, learn some things about how to be a better job seeker, get the resume or the CV cleaned up and get it into good shape. I think communities can serve this really well, because it's not just sort of the once a week meeting to get together with your peers and talk about your job search and what's gone well and what hasn't. It's that continuously on opportunity to have a group of peers, to have a cohort of people who've been kind of stuck in the same situation that frankly is not great. But the company has done something to support their move to the next stage in their journey. And so it's incredibly powerful to be able to offer resources, be able to offer speakers, publications, jam sessions, chats that help people get to that next stage. And I think looking overall at talent communities, that's something that can be offered. Even at the early stages, if you have an owned community and you've got a space in there for a talent community, you're inviting in people that you think have If you've watched Willy Wonka, there's the golden ticket that admits you to the candy factory. You can give candidates the equivalent of the golden ticket. These are people that you think you want to hire, you just can't hire them right now. And there's a tremendous opportunity to bring them in and have them engaged with the brand. Hopefully they've been dreaming of working for you all of their lives, where now that they've learned about you, they're your biggest fan. How do you keep them engaged if you know that you can't hire for the next 3 months, if you're in a hiring freeze? And I'm hearing this about a lot of organizations right now. And this is playing the long game of recruiting. I think it's really important to think of talent communities in that way.
Fantastic. I echo everything that you've said. So I think this is a super important concept. But let me just move on with the questions. And I think there's some really cool ones. So Debshell, she's been fantastic, especially with the notes and then all the involvement in the sessions. So thank you very much, Deb. Thank you for sharing. Super interesting concept. I'd love to see your thoughts on the most successful version, internal versus external.
Interesting. I think internal communities are more likely to be around in organizations. Just from my experience, I do a lot of work with employee experience platforms, and it's not uncommon for those organizations for organizations that have them to have employee resource groups enabled there to enable diversity, equity, and inclusion in hiring practices, to have discussions about supporting people in different geographies and different cultures. So really important, element to have as part of community life, especially now in remote work cultures where people are working from their homes, and the need is all the more crucial for them to feel a sense of belonging with the rest of the organization, to feel kinship to the vision and the direction of the organization. When I think that this is the thing that employers worry about a lot with remote work. If I have people that are working on their own, are they going to no longer really be empathetic to what my organization's needs are and what it's about? So I think there's a core of strength in talent communities for organizations that have invested in employee experience platforms, or who have things like Slack or Teams where there's regular interaction and a sense of camaraderie. The stickiness of those internal communities is critically important. If you read any of the research that Gallup poll comes out with year after year, the number of people that are engaged, actively engaged, or feel connected to their company is abysmally low, shockingly low in so many organizations. So I think internal communities are probably the stronger space, but the external communities, how recruitment is going out to social platforms, going out to community platforms that aren't owned by the brand necessarily, and then those that are owned by the brand. I don't know that there's been any kind of real formalized way of addressing that from what I've seen. Not that I've seen everything in the world. I would love to be proven wrong that there are some of these that are doing it right. And if any of you know about these, reach out to Ilker and me on LinkedIn and would like to hear a little bit more about them and how they work or don't work for you.
Wonderful. Maybe just time to squeeze in just one or two more questions. There's one which is absolutely fantastic from Dan. I've loved this question. Where would you start building community in the talent lifecycle, candidates, employees, alumni, given it may be difficult to get started on all at once?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a conversation that, as community professionals, it's an opportunity to approach your human resources group or your recruitment group, and to talk to senior leadership about potential for community. Recommend some pilots, really map where your organization happens to be at the moment, and think in terms of, what are your easiest starting points? Where can you start them? And then give them a phased approach. It may be that you start with the internal community first, or maybe if you've got an existing strong customer community or partner community, maybe you begin there and start to build out from there. I wouldn't try to do it all at once, but I think to be able to map and give them a vision and help them see how success could look like, for them. I think recruiters are going to be open to this. Recruiters are already community builders in their own right. It's natural for them to want to reach out and to connect to others and help them to be in more fulfilled spaces, to do meaningful work. And I think it's not a big shift to get them to think about, like, how do we do this in online spaces? How do we do it meaningfully out there?
Cool, fantastic. And I think there's just one more time and one more little question that we can actually take a little time for to get one more question from Sonia. Any thoughts on building a talent community with shared behaviors and outcomes where there's a joint blend of people on payroll and people motivated through other means, bringing full-time employee writers and non-full-time employee creators together, for example?
I love the creativity of that. That's amazing. Thank you, Sonia. The opportunity is there. I think as organizations start to think more flexibly about talent, as not just people that are drawing a paycheck from you, but people who are super fans who want to contribute their ideas and proposals, or contractors who maybe can want to help in some way, like gig economy people who want to contribute to the organization in some way. How do you bring these people together in collaborative spaces to again, it goes back to one of the early bullet points I had. How do you co-create processes? How do you co-create culture within an organization? I think there's powerful potential around building a view of talent that is far more expansive than most organizations have been willing to accept previously.
Fantastic. And I think that pretty much concludes our time and our session. Todd, this has been a historic moment for me anyway, for talent community kind, so to speak. But it's been wonderful. It's been great, and it's been worth all the effort. Me staying up late, and of course, putting together all this presentation. Only you could have delivered this neatly, and of course, only our esteemed audience could have engaged and interacted with what we've told them, what you told them. In this particular way. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Certainly all the community builders are thanking you too about the telling them about the talent community. So thanks again, and this is the end of this session.